Hi guys, I know it's been a while since I put a video out. I wanted to put out something different. I know the feeding videos are fun, but they do get a bit repetitive. So today I'm going to post a bit of an overview on how we make the shelves in our cages. And I get asked about this process a lot. And I finally found the opportunity to put together a little bit of an overview on how we make ours. Now, it's not the only way and not even necessarily the best way, but it's the way that we've done ours for the 20-something cages we've made already. And so yeah, we'll quickly look over some new cages and I'll show some examples on how I make them. Other than that, not too much to update. Everyone's doing well. We're still waiting on our Baird's rat snakes to hatch. They are taking quite a bit longer than we expected, but they still look fantastic. I'm seeing the babies moving around in the eggs, so they're getting really close. And yeah, so we'll hop on over to the second reptile room and have a look and go through our process for how we build the shelves. So this is the beginning of our second snake room. And I know it's really echoey in here. There's not much in this room yet, so it's not the greatest for recording, but hopefully the mic will help with that. But anyways, so just like the first room, this one is entirely dedicated to snake cages. It's not as big as the first room, so it won't fit quite as many cages, but we're still gonna get a good number in here at the end of the day. So this first wall here has 7 cages. Divided into 2 stacks, as you can see. And the closet's gonna have cages built in, just like the first room. This closet only has 2 large cages built in. And then on the wall behind me is just gonna have a single stack of 5-foot cages for our Russian rat snakes. So still a good number of snakes and a good number of cages in here. The phone is making the room look smaller than it is, but it'll be cozy. I think it'll be a really fun room once it's all done. This wall here is going to house a lot of our smaller rat snakes, as well as our 2 younger Hunter and milk snakes in the shorter cages here. So it's going to be a fun group. But anyways, so the point of this video is to show you how we design and make the shelves in our cages. And I'm asked about this a lot. And like I said, I'm not fantastic at tutorial videos or explaining the process of something. I tend to just kind of figure it out as I go, and it doesn't always end up being like a super neat step-by-step process. So I'll do my best to break it down. I've left each cage at a different stage in the process to help you see what I'm talking about. I'm not going to be doing any actual work while I'm talking because it takes enough time for me to try to make these videos, never mind trying to actually work while I'm talking. It's a recipe for disaster. So yeah, we'll just start at the beginning and work our way through. And if I miss anything and you feel like I haven't explained a certain part well enough, or you have additional questions, just ask. This is by no means supposed to be a complete how-to video. It's just showing you certain steps along the way. So if you need me to fill in the blanks for anything, just ask and I'll be happy to explain further. Okay, the first step is to actually design the shelves. And this step can be daunting if you've never done it before. It does require you to have a bit of a vision of how many shelves you want, how big you want them, what kind of shape you want them in, where you want to place them. It requires you to have a bit of a mental image of what you want the finished cage to look like. So at this point, we've made enough of them that we have a bit of a formula for any given cage size of how many shelves it's going to take to fill the space. And that's really what you want to do, is you want to fill the empty space. There's not much of a point in having a taller cage if that height isn't usable for the snake. The example that I've given many times is if you're standing in a 6x6 foot room, it doesn't matter if the cage is 10 feet above your head or 100 feet above your head. If you can't use the space, it's not doing you much good. So this is why we have second stories, third stories, and buildings, is so we can actually use the height. And so using big shelves and placing them in a way that really fills up the space is probably the most important part of designing a cage from scratch. It sets up the cage in so many ways and how the snake can use it and how you can design the rest of the cage. So my biggest piece of advice for designing shelves is to go bigger than you initially think and use more of them than you initially think. If you have some doubts about what size exactly would look good and how to position things, take a big piece of cardboard and just cut out a shape and hold it up in the cage and see how it looks, see how it fills the space. What we usually do for most cages is we have a basking shelf, which on the left-hand stack here, you'll see the basking shelves is this big single one here with the light above it. These shorter cages are short enough they don't need a shelf underneath the basking light because that's a good distance already. But most of them you'll see a nice big basking shelf on the right-hand stack. The basking side is on the right side. So you'll see the big basking shelves, and then we'll basically just cut as many shelves on the cool side as we need to fill up the space. At this point, we basically just go overboard for what we think we need, and it ends up making some really cool cages. So my piece of advice is cut bigger shelves and cut more shelves, because it really is the most important part of the initial setup of the cage. For our shelves here, what we did was we basically just went through our scrap pile and used as much of it as possible. So that had the added bonus of taking care of almost all of our waste that we have from building the cages themselves. And it also gave us some really cool shelf shapes. So as you can see in our notebook, it's just really rough ideas for shelves, and it doesn't always end up, obviously, it doesn't always end up the way that we initially draw it up. Sometimes we get to the wood pile and we see something else that maybe works a little bit better and is a little bit different. There's not much magic going on here with the shelf shape in particular, but so once you have your shapes drawn out, we cut ours with our table saw and our jigsaw, and then we very roughly sand them. And if you can see, it's still fairly rough along the edges, and I leave that on purpose because when we add the spray foam edge, all these little fibers and all these little grooves help strengthen the foam, and it helps the foam really grab onto the wood. You can reinforce that. You can give the foam more to grab onto on the edge. I've never found that to be necessary. There's nothing wrong with overbuilding something a little bit. However, I have unfortunately had to disassemble some shelves that I've made, and I can tell you that the foam does not come off very easily. It's pretty stuck on there. So I just leave the edges fairly rough, and the foam will grab onto that just fine. So once you have all the shelves cut out, the next step is the most time consuming, I find. That might not actually be true. It might just feel the most time consuming, but it certainly is the most space consuming, because you need to completely seal the shelves all the way around before you mount them. So for us, these 7 cages added up to having 30-some shelves. So we needed to find space to apply the sealant and let them dry. So the way we do it is the upper part of the shelf, the part where the substrate will be sitting on, I just seal that with dry lock. If you're building the kind of shelf that's not going to have substrate on top, I would recommend some kind of a glossy finish so that it can be wiped if the snake ever goes to the bathroom on it. My snakes very, very rarely make a mess on their shelf. Like, I can count probably on one hand any time that I've ever had to clean up a mess on a shelf. they like to drop bombs from on the shelf, but it still ends up on the floor. So I don't worry too much about it. I also have about 1 inch of substrate on top of the shelf. So even if they make a mess, that substrate's gonna catch it before it actually hits the shelf itself. That being said, I do occasionally spray down the cages, so I do need the wood to be waterproof. Wood does not like getting wet, so it is much better to go overboard with sealing it up rather than regret it later on. You can't see the sealant here because I just use a clear coat on the edges. This edge is going to be fully covered with spray foam yet. I also seal up the back edge that's going to be against the wall, and the underside, which basically never gets wet. I either do a white paint and clear coat, or if I have extra Drylock lying around, I'll coat it with Drylock too. But yeah, that is the first real time-consuming step here. You want the shelves to be 100% coated before you mount them. And once that's done, then you can start placing them. Now, that is definitely a task that requires a lot of work. It's something that we've tried to do as a 2-person job, and I have to say that having 4 arms in one cage makes it even worse. So nowadays what I do is I'll just stack up various paint cans or old books until I can balance the shelves at the height that I want them, and then I can just attach them to the wall while they're sitting there on top of this stack. That's worked well. It is sometimes horribly awkward, but it does work. and we use these metal brackets nowadays. We used to use just leftover triangles of 2x4 as supports. That works, of course, but it's not very pretty. I used to use much more spray foam to decorate, and so I would just spray foam over the pieces of wood and paint it, and you wouldn't see them. But nowadays I use much less spray foam. So for the sake of how it looks, but also the function of it, and trying to minimize the amount of foam and painting that we have to do, we switched to these metal brackets. We just get them at Lowe's. They just come in packs of 4. You can use any metal brackets really. For the really big shelves, we actually put brackets on top as well, I think. Yeah, so this basking shelf has one at the back there. And for any shelf that's a little bit heavier or sticks out a little bit farther, putting the brackets on both the bottom and the top really keeps it 100% stable. It's completely solid up there. For most of the shelves, most of the sizes that we do, just 2 shelves under, or 2 brackets underneath will do it. But anyway, so once the shelves are mounted, I do another coat of Drylock on top, and I make sure to get it up on the walls about 1/2 inch. And this just seals up the gap where the shelf meets the wall. And when I spray down the cage, I don't have to worry about water getting back behind there. Even though the edge is sealed, I don't want water leaking back there and not drying up. So just doing another coat of Drylock on top yet and sealing it to the wall, make sure that any moisture stays on top of the shelf and will dry up quickly. So after the shelves are mounted and Drylocked once more, we then have to spray foam. And this cage is just one step forward. This is just spray foamed, and I haven't touched it since, except to cut off a couple really droopy parts that just kind of fell a little bit too far off of the shelf edge. But this has just been spray foamed. It's all dry now. Usually I say give it about 2 days before you start working on the foam. So I do a bead of foam. If you can see, I do a bead of foam right where the shelf meets the wall. Again, this just keeps moisture back again from that crack where the shelf meets the wall. It keeps the substrate a little bit back from the wall. Stabilizes the shelves even more. And then I add my lip on the edge of the shelves to hold substrate. I will admit that it takes a little bit of practice. I'm not sure if me describing it's gonna do any good. You kind of just have to try it, but mostly I just put the spray foam right on the very edge, but make sure it is definitely sitting on top of the shelf, and it kind of just sags down a little bit as it dries. Like I said, it takes a little bit of practice. Once you've done it a couple times, it's not very difficult. So that's really all there is to that. I add some foam on the wall itself just to add some more climbing points, you know, like this. Rat snakes especially, which will be what's going in these cages. Rat snakes especially love to climb anything, so just adding a little more texture to the walls just gives them more things to climb all over. So once you have the spray foam on, let it dry completely. Now this is where my personal style can be a bit different from other people's. The typical advice is to take a knife and to carve the spray foam. When it initially dries, as you can see, it has a shiny layer, and stuff doesn't stick to that layer very well. I don't actually find that it matters too much with dry lock itself, but like paint doesn't like to stick to that shiny layer, so you have to get the layer off. The typical advice is to use a knife and to carve it, and I don't know if it'll focus, but it's quite porous in there. So when you carve it, you expose that porous texture, which grabs onto things, or things grab onto it much better. Now, I personally don't like carving spray foam. I don't like the work that's involved. I don't like the way it comes out looking a lot of the time. We kind of have this certain style of kind of round, bubbly shelf edges that I like to stick with. So the way we do ours is we just take a sanding block and we just sand as much as we can reach with the block. And this poor block has seen better days. It was used for this entire stack. But you don't need much grit. Honestly, that shiny layer comes off really easily. And just using the corner and the flatter edges, you can get most of the surface that's exposed. And you don't have to get 100% of it. Like I said, dry lock does stick to even the shiny parts fairly well. So once you're done sanding, I usually tape off wherever the foam meets the wall. I usually tape it off just as a bit of a guard. It does take a lot of tape, also takes a lot of time. It's not strictly necessary if you're very careful. I don't know if I'll do it on every cage going forward, but for now, for this one, it's not that much to take care of, and then I don't have to think about getting anything on the walls, because the next step is dry locking the cages, or dry locking the shelves, I should say. So this one has been dry locked, and you can see I do hit the tape a little bit. If you're very careful, you could do this without hitting the wall, and then you wouldn't have to tape it. I'm usually in a bit of a hurry when I do these, just because I like to get this stage knocked out as fast as I can. So I did tape these for this round. You want to work in nice thin layers for the dry lock. It dries pretty quick. Give it a day, come back and do another layer if you want to, but the dry lock gives it a nice rocky texture without it being sharp. I don't find that, especially after you paint over the dry lock, it's not rough. It's not rough enough to like scuff up snake scales or anything, but it does give enough of a texture they can climb over it very easily, and it makes it look a little nicer. For this particular stack, what I did was I dry locked, I let it dry, I removed the tape, and then I moved over to doing the dark base coat on the foam. And I'm going to turn the lights on. It's going to look bright for a second. Okay. So what I do now is I take a paintbrush with black paint and I just wedge it right in between here to try to get down in there as much as possible. There might be better ways to do this, but this is what I found works. So I'm basically just cutting it in and bringing the black over the foam so that you can't see the foam in between there. And I do a dark base coat on all of the foam that I can see. If I were to show you the underside of these shelves, it's not so pretty because nobody's ever going to see that except the snake, and they don't care. Once that's dry, then I'll add more colors. I'm not sure if the phone is going to pick up the colors necessarily. Colors usually look pretty terrible from phone videos, but I mix a little bit of green to give it a more mossy look. And then once the colors are all where I want them to, dry brushing with a light color helps bring out the texture. But that's pretty much it. You know, even this still doesn't look very pretty. You can see up on the wall here where I've had to touch up the black paint around the foam. I have to go back and put a clear coat over that again so it matches the rest of the wall. And right now it's standing out, but it'll blend right back in once I get that shiny clear coat on there. But, you know, even now it doesn't look fantastic. We focus a lot on the shelves at this stage because that's really all we have to look at. But the reality is once we pour in substrate, put the substrate on top of the shelves, put the branches in, get the hides placed, put the plants in. Once all of that is done, the shelves are a very small part of the cage. So, ooh, it is thundering. So once everything's in place, it's okay if the shelves aren't 100% perfect. I am actually a professional artist, and I found that I was getting too hung up on making the rocks look as perfect as I wanted them, which didn't always work out the way I intended. And then what I realized was even in the cages where I didn't love how the shelves turned out, as soon as it was all full of everything else, I didn't even notice. So, you know, give it your best shot. Experiment, try to find out how to make it look the way you want it to, but don't get too hung up on perfection because it does all come together in the end. Yeah, so that was my little pep talk. I think I was giving that pep talk to myself more than anyone because it's a little daunting taking on this many cages at a time and trying to make them all look the way I want them to look, but cage after cage, when it finally comes together and is finished, I'm always happy with how they turn out. So this one is basically done with painting. The next step is going to be waterproofing the floor. It's already completely sealed with Drylock, but I do like to put a physical barrier down, so I put some plastic sheeting in there and fasten it in place. And then we'll be putting the side pieces on, the whole front frame, and go from there. And then it's going to be a matter of moving in the branches and the plants and installing the lighting properly here, and then we'll be trying to finish up each one of these cages as well. And at some point we'll be done, be able to move the snakes in. We have our plants here. They arrived yesterday. I get asked a lot, or sometimes not even asked. I think there's been quite a few people that just assume my cages are bioactive. None of them are bioactive, not even one, which is flattering that the plants look that real, but they're all silk. So, so there's our whole stack of plants for this wall of cages. Of course, the best part of building new cages is moving the snakes into the cages and watching them get settled in. So this cage is going to belong to this guy. This is Eno. He is our 1-year-old white-sided black rat snake, and he is definitely the biggest of our group. And I think he's just gonna love being in this cage. I can't wait to watch him settle in. Anyways, so yeah, I hope this video was somewhat of a help, and I will give updates as these cages are finished and as the snakes move in. I will hopefully get some videos out a little more frequently than I have been. As these cages get finished, I will have some more free time to put together more content. I'm going to try to do some introduction videos to individual snakes, just like Eno, and try to do some videos on some species in general and how we take care of them. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll see you again soon.